So, hi everyone, and thanks for coming to this roundtable. So, unexpectedly, among the 4 panelists, 2 have COVID. So, yeah, so it's Belkis online and Fix here only. Apologies for this. So, yeah, our topic, do the benefits of emerging technologies truly outweigh the associated long-term social, human, and environmental risks? I was very interested in the subject. And first, I wanted to draw attention on the benefits that might be quite different actually than what we think. I speak as a more technical person, and I often see that non-technical persons are not really aware of the possible benefits, and sometimes are, on the contrary, expecting benefits that are really too difficult to do on a technical point of view. So the discussion is, of course, depending on that, on the benefits and what they are. So the same way, the risks can be different from what we expect. They can be bigger or smaller, of course. And it's an invitation for me to step back and look at the big picture of what we do. Because we are most of the time the eyes on the indicators of our logic frames, but we tend to forget the principles, and we are in this industrialization era of humanitarian action, and so maybe going back to the principles can help. So we'll see with we were supposed to see with Becky, but she's not here, and Fix will speak about some benefits and but with some drawbacks. But the benefits were still outweighing those drawbacks. And Belkis will provide a deeper analysis of some recent cases that brought a lot of lessons to be learned, hopefully, by the whole sector. So, yeah. So Fix, who is project manager for digital innovation, right now at the Norwegian Refugee Council.
Right, thank you, Fred, for this introduction, and already some apologies. As he said, we were supposed to be 4, we will be 2, so at some point we really need to compensate what they were like their time. So already some apologies, because we will then go to a bit more improvisation for the second part. But let's start with what was planned, so that's already something. So I'll introduce you to a case of using that technologies, and it's about a project I've been working on a previous segment using a chatbot using WhatsApp. So what was the starting point of the project? Well, actually, that was in Lebanon, where the beneficiaries and people in need were scattered in the countryside. I've presented a nice setup of this, where actually it was not easy for them to move towards the office, so there was no open office to show up to. And for any request, any information, for any understanding on what they were eager to receive as beneficiaries, aid, they had to wait for staff to pass by, or to call hotline, which was really expensive regarding their budget. Also, the hotline had, even if it's, I mean, the hotline was great, but just there was only one operator, so it's only taking one call at a time. So yeah, after some point, actually, we received requests from them. Would it be possible to have a communication through WhatsApp, at least for free for us, because they have a Wi-Fi in their sites, in their house? To which the answer from the organization was, well, if we start having WhatsApp, then we will receive mass calls, because then it will become cheaper, and somehow the price was a blocking point to receive too many calls and requests that the organization had not the staff and the resources to handle. But taking this point of view is not really the best way to provide aid to the population. So that's where we started the project and say, okay, right, well, we could have a WhatsApp, but instead of having a human answering, we can have a machine actually. So this is how it works in a simple way. They were already using, and are already using WhatsApp to reach out with the family, relatives, for work, etc. And how basically it works, you are a user, so you just send a message through a network to WhatsApp, and WhatsApp says, okay, I will dispatch the message to the recipient, they know the number, and then they send the message to the ones you are sending a message there, and it always goes this way. If you want to do this, of course, there is a need for a human with fingers to type a message or to record a voice note. The principle here with the bot is just to replace one of the human by a machine here that does exactly the same. So whenever you are sending a message to the bot, it goes through the network to WhatsApp. They say, okay, it's not, I don't need to send it to a mobile phone, but to a server. And then the server it's a software, and software you can just compute it and say, okay, when will you receive one, then you send this message. It's like a voice message. So that was the project, because then it helps, it allows to handle hundreds, thousands of messages and requests at a time, because one of the great advantages of technology is that a bot, a robot, software can handle much more than a human at the same time. So let's go next one. So that was for the technical part. Now, what are the services that we were planning and we did put in place? Was basically providing any type of information, contact list, services available. At that time also like COVID information or whatever. That was like, actually the whole purpose of this is just to provide whatever you can find on a website, but just crunched into WhatsApp. Why not a website? Just because we realized that also the population we were serving were not really comfortable or using the internet and the web as we know it, but just more like WhatsApp only, not knowing exactly how it works behind, but that it doesn't matter. Whenever you can enter a WhatsApp conversation, that was fine. So FAQ, service request, so it's like filling a form of age request. We are here and we would like to have a clean water, so that's just a request or whatever. Consult their own file or accessing the data or the request. I must admit that this one was not in place when I did the project, but it was at least the plan. Surveys that allows to provide, to issue any type of mobile data collection you would do in the field with enumerators, etc., but automatically pushed on the phone, and then they can reply. Of course, these are some limitations in terms of relevancy of the information that are collected, but still, for small or easygoing and quick, if you need like to assess your entire population in 24 hours, this way you can do it. With enumerators, that's quite challenging to push campaigns. That was more like awareness campaigns, and we had, for instance, some frauds happening in the sites of our area, with people pretending that they were coming from an organization and asking for money for the services. Of course, so we just issued quickly an awareness to say we will never ask you for money. So if someone is asking you for money, don't give it, and please kick them out. And the status update. So that's for the request. If someone was having a request, then you can push notification like your request has been received, and treat it by our staff, and we will visit you by tomorrow. This type of service. So how does it look like? It looks like this. So it's a software. No need to extend. That's not the topic of today, but just to say that it's just actually a web interface software. Going to the results. So after 1 year use, the outcomes of the headline survey, and this was before the machine learning. I will just talk about quickly about the machine learning after. But just to say that it was with text interaction, not with so I will let you read this. I'm not just gonna read the slide, but just to say that the acceptance of and the adoption of the tool was quite impressive, and endorsed by the population. So somehow it was really responding a need. So that has been confirmed. It was requested by them. We delivered, and then they were really say yes. That's where we want to go. Now, of course, it comes with drawbacks that we will discuss today. The digital gap. What I mean with that is just that, of course, not everybody is using WhatsApp. For instance, in Lebanon, among the Syrian population, more or less 94% of the people had access to a phone, and 80% were using WhatsApp. So, of course, already the adoption of the tool was there, but still, that means that the remaining percentage are the most vulnerable, because they are again kicked out of this type of services. So that definitely this need to be followed up. The spirit of this whole tool was to provide a bot to handle the mass of the request, while we are targeting and spending more time on the remaining vulnerable, not to just replace all the work by a bot. But still, this need to be to make sure that it happens. Loss of interaction. That's something that comes a lot from the management saying, yeah, but if we put this in place, then my staff will not go to the field and spend as much time with that they should. Well, to me, that's more a management issue than a tech issue. If you want your staff and your project to go to the field, well, it's up to the management to organize this. But still, yes, we need to make sure that it happens. Data privacy and data protection, data security, this is a full topic to take into consideration. Of course, we are here talking about WhatsApp. WhatsApp is not the most trustable network, mobile messaging company. And behind this, the antenna I was showing is using the Twilio, which also is a big US company. And so here the trend was more to use what was already used to avoid adoption issues, etc. But then definitely to get rid of these companies if as soon as possible by using other technologies. That's about data privacy, data security, data protection. We can talk about this later. Usually I really strongly advise to separate that technology is a tool, it's not a solution, and should we go for tech, etc. It's just like any type of support. We do have laptops, we do have cars in our field of operation because it's needed. So technology is needed, but having a car doesn't replace the fact that you need to provide to do your job, and that's the same for the tech. It's not like adopting a chatbot will not replace. It will just ease. It's just a way to do more or better, but it's still new. There is a lot of work to do. And that's it. I wanted to keep this short and let now. I think we will adopt first we present and then we go for a question and answer. No, I think that will be more fluid, like in terms of.
Unless there is a very urgent question. No. Okay.
I think yes. So let's present then, and then we can have a debate all together.
So let me now introduce Ben Keith-Wheeler, who is a senior researcher on crisis and conflict division of Human Rights Watch. So, just once, how can I just one person?
Thanks so much. Does everyone hear me clearly?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think so.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So, my experience in this area comes from a very different vantage point. To start with, to be very clear, I'm not a technical person. I definitely don't have the technical skills that some working in this field have. I'm a human rights person. I've been a human rights lawyer for many years now, and have worked mostly in the context of areas where an armed conflict was going on, and thus have been always working in very close proximity to very large international humanitarian responses, emergency responses. And so, the work that we do at Human Rights Watch, I'm a senior researcher at Human Rights Watch, is very much focused on documenting human rights abuses and when they happen. We do this by interviewing firsthand victims and witnesses, and then we publish everything that we find, on the abuses themselves, what led to the abuses, and use our publications to essentially push for change, to try and stop abuses from happening. And what I started to see in some countries I was working in, that some of the human rights abuses or potential abuses that people were facing were not coming from, specific armed groups, from the hostilities as a whole, but instead some of these potential abuses were actually coming from the engagement of the humanitarian sector with new technologies. Now, I'll focus very much in my presentation specifically on data gathering, personal data gathering, and in that I'm referring to not only biometrics, but to a large extent we're talking about biometrics of beneficiaries of humanitarian assistance. So it's fingerprints, iris scan, photographs, and then in addition to that, that information is always being collected in conjunction with other personal information, which is ultimately what makes some of these systems so dangerous. You have people's names, potentially their addresses from wherever they were originally living before they fled. It might, have information about their religious group. It might have a range of different protection information that's linked then to their biometrics. So an ability to identify them, that is being used by humanitarians, but equally could be used by government and non-government actors with access to those systems. And I think one thing that I've seen with the adoption of this new technology is very little discussion within organizations around one of the most important, if not the most important, humanitarian principles, which is do no harm. And when humanitarians say do no harm in shorthand, what it usually means is not do no harm, because it's impossible to preclude the chance that you do some minimal harm, but do as little harm as possible. And that really is the guiding principle of the humanitarian community. And yet with these new technologies, instead I'm seeing organizations and donors reverting instead to other standards. They're talking about improving efficiency, they're talking about minimizing fraud, and while both of these things are important, they're not humanitarian principles. There isn't a humanitarian principle that says you must be as efficient as possible, but there isn't a humanitarian principle that says do no harm. And so I think a lot of why we as Human Rights Watch have decided to start looking at this area and doing research is because we've been deeply concerned to see how these new technologies have been embraced and rolled out in the field with very little thinking around how one can ensure that these new technologies are not causing harm to beneficiaries. And ultimately, when we're talking about beneficiaries, we're talking about the most vulnerable people in the world, people who are either likely in their own country but being marginalized and vulnerable in their relationship with the government, or not in their country anymore, so have even less agency over the authorities in the place that they've now ended up. As some of you may know, over the last 10 or more years, organizations, particularly large UN agencies, have decided that the collection and use of biometrics and other forms of personal information is by far the best way of making their operations more efficient, minimizing fraud, as they put it, and essentially the idea is that you can more quickly get the bag of rice that is meant to go to this specific individual into the hands of that person, because you have their fingerprints, you know exactly who should receive the bag of rice, and you can do that match very quickly. You need less staff in the field, and the chance that someone else gets the bag of rice is mitigated by the fact that you are giving it to the person based on their fingerprints. But of course, when you're talking about people as vulnerable as the very people that are receiving this assistance, in many cases they've been persecuted because of that identity. So, we've been advocating with donors and with organizations, and particularly large UN agencies, on this issue, and on really trying to push for data protection standards to be fundamentally enshrined within organizations, within their DNA, when they're thinking about rolling out these kind of data collection exercises. And we haven't really seen much by way of improvement, I would say, in the last years. And so what we felt very strongly was we need to start actually publishing research that shows very clearly what kind of tangible harms are being caused. Because unless we can show that people are actually being put at risk because of this data collection, organizations aren't going to, of their own volition, improve their standards. Because improving their standards, it's expensive. It requires better technology that protects data better, but it also requires organizations to potentially stop collecting as much data as they're collecting, and they're under a lot of pressure from donors to collect as much as possible. So the first piece of research that we did on this was in the context of Bangladesh. As some of you may remember, in 2017 you had a flood of Rohingya from the Rohingya population that was living in Myanmar that flooded into Bangladesh, fleeing horrific abuses across the border within Myanmar, and they settled in Bangladesh. And the Bangladeshi government asked UNHCR to come in and do a registration of the Rohingya population, and we're informing people that once they registered, they would receive a card that they could use to get access to assistance. And some Rohingya were actually quite worried about this, and they said, we don't want to register with UNHCR because we think our data is going to be given to Myanmar, the very government that we just fled from, that's accused of, carrying out genocide against our own population. And UNHCR multiple times in forums with the community and publicly said, no, your data won't be shared with Myanmar, it's just being shared with Bangladesh to provide you with assistance. What we were able to show very clearly was that UNHCR actually knew that the data would be shared by Bangladesh with Myanmar. So UNHCR was going to do this data collection and registration exercise, give that data to Bangladesh, who would issue ID cards for people to get access to services, but they knew Bangladesh would then share that information with Myanmar. And at least all of the people that we interviewed who had gone through this registration process never, ever gave their informed consent to have their data shared by Bangladesh then onwards with Myanmar. And I think this is an important example because it shows that while UNHCR in and of itself wasn't potentially trying to do harm by sharing data with Myanmar, by sharing it with the host government, knowing that the host government would share it onwards, that's where we really see some of these considerable risks coming in. We also did a piece of research focused on Afghanistan. The dynamics there are different, but as many of you will remember, when the Taliban took control of Kabul last August, it was able to get its hands on numerous databases that had been funded by the international community, sometimes UN agencies, sometimes bilaterally by donors, and these were things like a database with the payroll data and HR data of all of the judges in the country, including female judges who are under particular persecution by the Taliban right now. There were also payroll systems for the police, for the military, again, categories of people that are being hunted down by the Taliban now, as well as other information coming from the national ID, the online national ID system. And there, what I found so interesting in the research was that I spoke to so many Afghans who said years ago when they signed up for their e-ID, their national identity card, the online one, that they told me that they lied about their professions and their level of education. And they lied and said, I'm a farmer instead of, for example, I'm a judge. They told me that I did that because I knew that the Taliban would get access to this data, and I knew I would be at risk because of my profession. And I think this example stands out so much because it clearly shows that the international community and international donors were not even trying to engage with the affected population to understand from them, were there risks with the systems that they were trying to set up, and they weren't even engaging then in a discussion of how to mitigate those risks. We've also looked at other examples, including one in the context of Kenya, where young children were registered as Somali refugees by adults, sometimes relatives, sometimes friends of their families, even though they were Kenyan. And subsequently, when UNHCR started sharing its data with the Kenyan government on refugees that were registered there, and when the government then started coming into refugee camps and registering refugees, that data meant that now any one of these children, when they turn 18, they're being rejected for their national ID card as a Kenyan, and they're being rendered stateless because the government says, you were registered at 8 years old as a Somali refugee, therefore you are not Kenyan, even though, these children all have Kenyan birth certificates, they have high school diplomas, their parents have their Kenyan ID cards, so they have extensive evidence that they're Kenyan. But because of the way this data was shared, we led to a situation where 40,000 people were rendered stateless. There are a few other examples that we've looked into. I won't go into those in more detail, but I just wanted to give a sense of what kind of harms we're talking about. We're talking about people whose lives are being put at risk, who are at risk of being deported back to a country where they were a victim of horrific abuses. We're talking about, in the case of Kenya, people being rendered stateless. So we're talking about very serious harms and risks that can simply come from data being collected by a humanitarian partner and then being shared, whether it's with a host government or another government. And so, what we really hope changes, and we're not saying that personal data should never be collected in the humanitarian space. In some cases, it makes sense to collect that data. In some cases, it makes sense to collect biometrics. For example, if UNHCR is issuing someone with a with a travel document, with what what to them is going to be a passport. We understand that biometrics, are integrated into documents like that. But there are cases in which perhaps biometrics don't need to be used. Giving someone a bag of rice, does one really need to have their fingerprints attached to that? So there does need to be a lot more thinking around data minimization. What data do we really need to collect? And before any of these projects are launched, what is best practice within the data community is carrying out something called a data protection impact assessment. And as part of this assessment, what one does is think through what kind of data you're planning to collect in the context of this project, and then really think through all the potential harms that could come from that data being collected or being shared or being stored improperly, and then taking steps to mitigate that. And that kind of thinking is I think, really what we need to see going forward to minimize chances of harm like the ones that I've cited today. So I'll stop there.
Many thanks, Belkis, for this very deep and comprehensive analysis. Now questions from the audience. Who has any question to any of the speakers?
So I think that there are plenty of examples we can provide of bad or good ideas. So definitely the point here, totally agreeing with Belkis, is to, and actually the last one of the DPIA is quite a good introduction, because it's a document enforced by law, so you need to have it. But that provides you, I think it's smart the way it has been done and designed, because it forces you just to have the thinking of, all right, so I will think twice, or I will think, what are we doing? This document is quite really interesting, because you are listing what you are doing, how, and what can be the harm done. And truly said, what we are talking here about is usually to transform what was on paper into databases, and the difference is that maybe a database you can secure it more, but actually it's more fluid. There can also be more copy-paste is much more easier than to copy and paste, to photocopy, to copy the paper files that you have. And this fluidity makes it more complicated to really track and to protect. And I usually hear people speaking about technology in the sector. Yeah, but it's much easier. Yes, and indeed, what is easier is not maybe only the good idea. If you had all the GAFAM combining all the data they have about their customer, because it's easier to have one single entry point for all data, so that when they need data, they just need to they can get there instead of asking again the same person. Don't think that many of the people will find it a good idea, while actually it's very common in the field. You hear usually that we shared all our data about the beneficiaries because it was easier. Yes, but so that we might not forget one among 1 million person. Well, that's also what's the type of a DPIA document helps you to balance. Say, well, it might be useful for this one on 1 million person that we might forget, but actually we are putting at threat the data of the others. And Belkis was highlighting, and I'm pretty sure she's more aware than I am about the consequences of about really cases of it did harm. And yes, true enough, it's a bit too new, and people are sometimes a bit enthusiastic about what it can provide to them, but less considering what it can cause as harm. Yes, first question.
I don't know, do we need to speak in the
Yes.
Hi, Meg here from CartONG. First of all, to react a bit to Belkis's points, I just want to say a huge thank you, because all that research that you guys have been publishing on biometrics, on the Afghanistan situation, on the Rohingya situation, have really made my life much easier when I'm trying to make aware the importance of taking a stance as an organization around these topics and having real proof of the harm that can occur. And I think that, digital harm is really something that, because the NGO world isn't sufficiently aware and knowledgeable in terms of tech, that it's often sort of hidden in a corner because everybody's afraid of taking up the topic. And I really admire organizations like Oxfam that have really taken a stance on biometrics in a way that other organizations haven't. And my question for our two speakers would be, beyond planning a DPIA or taking a stance for the organizations that can afford to say, no, I won't take on a project that has biometrics, what else would you suggest for organizations to better understand the risks involved and try and also disseminate that data culture and the risks associated to it in their organizations? Sorry for the long question.
I think Melkis is a bit frozen.
Should I jump in?
Agree.
Or-
Yes, please do.
I think trying to tackle and think through is where the response lies. You've got this tricky relationship between donors and between implementing organizations. And if a donor is putting out an appeal and is asking organizations to submit proposals to carry out a project that intrinsically foresee this kind of data collection or this kind of rollout of a new technology. The question is actually whether it's really up to donor to be doing that initial thinking around the potential harms and whether those can be mitigated before it even starts to get the proposal. Because if you put it on the organizations to do, then the risk ultimately end up with is that organizations are going to be trying to get access to the funding, so they're going to put in bids, and and subsequent to getting the money from the donor, then they might, if they're thinking about this very ambitiously, then they'll do a DPIA, and what if the result of that is we can't actually move forward with this project because the core of the project is unsafe. What the donor is asking us to do is unsafe. And so I can imagine that there are a lot of organizations that actually don't want to do that because that's that's then leading down a path that's very complicated for them. And if you're talking about, putting the onus on organizations to do a DPIA before they even have confidence that they're going to get the funding for that project when they're making the bid, then they're going to say, well, we don't even have the money yet. We're not being paid to do this assessment. So, why would we do it? And I think that's a big part of this problem. Nobody, in a way, is sort of paying for this due diligence to be done because either you've already got the money, in which case you feel the pressure to deliver, or you haven't gotten the money yet, in which case you don't want to pay to do it. So I do think we need to think through the extent to which we can really push donors to be, to be working with potentially independent auditor types, but one really needs to make sure these are institutions with the right connections locally in relevant countries and an ability to do these kind of audits. But that they would step in and they would be doing DPIAs again before the proposal is even distributed with the international community to make sure that donors are not asking organizations to put in bids to take up work that is unsafe.
And as my 5 cents on this, I've been working also on a study, but for an organization that already had the resources to spend, like the staff having the time to study it. So it's not accessible to everyone. But in a nutshell, the reflection was how can we build a system that makes it clean in terms of data privacy and security for biometrics with fingerprints on the infants from 0 to 5, and is the technology ready, etc. So we were kind of really going to the technique, and then once we were ready with something, we presented to the field operatives, and they were saying yes, that's fine, but actually we are NGO, non-governmental, and what you propose looks like governmental. So whatever it might be secure, we trust you, but if there is a chance that in the fields we are operating, the population can have a mixed perception of, or like being like reluctant or saying, usually these are governments doing this. If there is only one chance that this happens, we will never use it, because we don't want to go even to this stage of trying to explain, no, this is already too late. The people we are serving are just in situation where we don't want them to think about this. So my answer will also say to be to common sense, actually. Even before tackling the technical part, it is also on cultural matters.
Hi, my name is Sana Khan. I'm working as a senior technical advisor at the leading international and coming from Washington, D.C. I really appreciate you guys arranging this, kind of roundtable and discussing this kind of pressing topic. I want to make few comments and would ask a question or two. So please, to your point, I was wondering how can we build trust and awareness at every level, and when I say at every level, at the donor, at the implementing partner, at the at the core of human-centered approach and all that, because I think part of the problem, according to what I see, is everybody is doing job in their own shell. Some of the research that for example, how the people are feeling in the field, what they are experiencing, it's never been communicated to the donor, or whatever donor feels like, it's never been, everyone is running after to finish their job rather than, communicating or collaborating among peers or things like that. So I think another, to this point, I was curious, when we are proposing one solution over the other, what are the benefits and what evidence do we provide to the population that, okay, well, the reason to switch to that new approach is because it's going to facilitate you in one way or the other. So I think talking through some of the things are going to solve some problems. It's sometimes we come up with high-tech solutions and it never gets communicated to the root at the bottom of where the crisis exists. So I'm curious on knowing your thoughts. What are the efforts that are being done in this, kind of domain? And another comment I want to make is the situation around cybersecurity. So I think don't you think with this biometric, kind of approach, there is more vulnerability towards kind of having less cybersecurity around that, and if that data has been, kind of breached, or there is an attack or a cyber security sort of loopholes, it's going to be devastating compared to the other type of format that was in place earlier. So I'm going to stop here.
Maybe I can jump in very quickly on those 2 points. Just to say, I think that the data security, cybersecurity side is extremely important, and it's not one that I'm expert in at all. I mean, we've seen, obviously, in the last month that some major institutions who had invested an incredible amount of money and resource in ensuring that their systems were safe or hacked, and personal, sensitive personal information was accessed on very vulnerable people. So we know that can happen. But I would say, in my experience, organizations and particularly UN agencies really want to steer the discussion in that direction, because it allows them to then tell, you know, the community, the donors, about all the things they've done to make their systems as safe as possible. But in fact, you know, all of the examples that I gave you were ones where there was no data leak, there was no data hack, but it was this willful sharing of data based on a data sharing agreement between the UN agency and the government in question. And I actually see that that's an area that gets talked about much less, and as a result where I think the risks are even higher, because there you have, you know, a real agreement to open up the records, to share data, to give access to data to authorities, where the person who gave their data was never essentially told that their data would be shared in that way. And that gets to your first point and your first question. I think, as you said, you know, information, engaging with the community is so essential. In some humanitarian context, of course, that is happening, but it's to lesser or greater degrees, and in some cases, you know, it's done through specific individuals within the community. So often, particularly in the Middle East, that I've seen that information is essentially being disseminated to an older man or older men in the community that are seen as muhtars or leaders of the community, but there isn't any direct engagement with, for example, women or with, you know, younger people. And so this engagement is happening in a very specific way under somehow an assumption that that information is going to be disseminated further. And I think, you know, what I've been shocked by in my research is that, and I remember this very specifically in camps housing Syrian refugees in Jordan, you know, when I came to them and I said, today what I want to talk to you about is your biometrics and your personal data and how it was collected and whether you have concerns with that, everyone I spoke to was sort of baffled by the notion that I would even be concerned about that, given all the other things that they're facing, all the other vulnerabilities and risks that they have. Because to them, data security is just not something that comes up, because they have no idea of how that data could put them at risk. Nobody's ever explained it to them, nobody's ever talked to them about it, and so this is just something that people are not conscious of. And so, you know, when they get asked for a fingerprint, you know, to get access to a tent, they don't have any idea that that might actually put them at risk in the long run. So I think so much more has to be done to educate communities of data subjects, so that they really have a better understanding of what they're agreeing to, if they're even given an option to agree at all. And I would just say, you know, I think one of the largest harms in this is coming from the fact that UN agencies, for example, when they collect data that they then share with the host government, that the decision of what they share with the host government comes in the form of a data sharing agreement. Data sharing agreements exist in all places where you have UN agencies, in countries of host governments, and all of those data sharing agreements are confidential. So the only people that have access to them are the UN agency and the government in question. And from a data protection standpoint, the idea that data subjects do not have access to that and they don't know what data of theirs has been collected, why, and who it's going to be shared with and for what reasons is fundamentally problematic. And that's I think one of the key things. If this sector really wanted to improve, things like that would be made public, so that the people who are giving their own data, they can get access to that data sharing agreement and know exactly what's in it.
Yeah, the topic is quite broad, so but just to jump on this, maybe it's easy to stand this point being on the NGO side, but for me it's really like more in the donors' hands, because actually sometimes you are also like facing the duality of having the donor, like let's take the EU, because the GDPR is EU law that forces you to do something in their contract that goes against the GDPR, and when you are telling them, well, but you are asking us to do something illegal, in our understanding, they will not answer. Of course, they are smart enough, but then you start realizing that it's not the EU, it's the EU's, the law courts, the operations, etc., and then you start like being trapped into the political game, while it's their own level of, I mean, they're asking you to do something. It's a contract, so whatever can you do. And if you say we will not respect this time of this, we will not sign for this one of the contract, you say it's up to you, but the contract is one of or nothing. So that's just one point. There are lots of things to say about that, but maybe we can move forward to. Also, I want maybe to open the floor to the audience to react if you have some reaction or question, or we can move forward on.
Yeah, Daniel from Action here. Thank you for the presentation and discussion. I have a question related to what we saw this morning in the keynote and what Belkis and what you said as well. So you talk about two risks. One of the hacking part, like someone steal the database. Another one we share with someone, like a government. And there's a third one, we talk about the GAFAM, all these like big tech companies, Google, like Google has the smartphones, and then maybe Facebook the application, and Amazon the server. So all this data is running around this company operations. And is there a risk? So first of all, do you think there's a risk that these companies may share this data with some government, maybe not today or tomorrow, but this risk is not that important as the other? Or there's a risk, but we cannot do anything today? Or there's a risk and we should be doing something to like reduce this part of the operation?
According to my understanding of the situation, yes, and it's not like there is a risk, it's more like you need to consider that it's done. I mean, to me it's more to be on the safe part of it. If you are using this type of services, it's better to consider that it's done and then try to, because as we were saying just before, like protecting from hacking or from cyber security is just like securing your offices or your premises to avoid to be stolen a car or whatever. You cannot prevent it 100%. So if you are having activities in a poor neighborhood, maybe you will play low profile, like not showing your logo, not showing off some computers or whatever. You will try to first not to. You will first, of course, secure your office, but you will also play your low profile. I think that's the exact same thing with the data. You play low profile. Don't collect these data, or maybe if it's easier to collect them, but it's not safe enough or whatever, maybe it's better not to do it. All right, it will take more time, but I mean, again, it's a tool, it's not the solution, and if this tool is putting at risk, then maybe we should reconsider. It's not the perfect solution to any situation and to anything. So that's why also I'm a big advocate for not cloud solution. Of course, again, it's not secure 100%. It's just a different type of risk than that you can mitigate a different way. And red keys, maybe.
Thanks guys for the very interesting thoughts. I actually want to jump comment on this last question. We'll see. So you've mentioned all the risks that organizations face using this technology, and in some situations I would really agree, like biometrics, all this kind of stuff can be dangerous, so we should definitely analyze before we do design and implement this project. But let's say we've done that and we go for technology. I think we still face a huge gap in terms of what technology is available for us to actually do these things the right way. So you're mentioning local hosting, right? That's what you're saying. Like we should but you want to host like a data collection from a local server in Nigeria. Like I'll say, good luck. We have the human, the human resources to actually maintain the servers and all kind of stuff. So I think you have even the infrastructure. Maybe Nigeria is more example because they might have it, but you want to do this, I don't know, Burkina Faso, like much more complicated. So you're facing different kinds of problems, right? Like, and I think today what the community lacks in some ways is maybe more off-the-shelf solutions that actually mitigate these issues. Right? You can want to host, I don't know, a DHIS2 server, a Comcare server. These things are difficult to host because technology is complex by nature, right? So, and today we don't have good options, honestly. Like, I haven't found like any good options to say, okay, I'm going to do like local hosting for these kind of things, or you know, or like an alternative to Twilio that's not hosted in the US that integrates with WhatsApp and etc. So all these things that are complex, right? So I think the community itself, now that we've learned that, you know, there's research about like the risks and everything, like what are the solutions that exist? Can we map them? Can we have, I don't know, like, does anyone know about solutions like this? Because I feel that using the cloud, as you said, maybe it's obviously not great for security in some ways, but at the same time, it's like a way to give access to technology to more organizations and, you know, leverage the benefits of it in some way. So trade-offs here are complicated, you know, and I feel like today we don't have real good alternatives that are like cost efficient, that don't necessarily require NGOs to hire like software engineers to do it or external expertise that is very expensive. So, you know, all these things are sort of like contradictory in some ways, conflicting. And yeah, and I think personally I'd like to see more like solutions, or know more about the solutions that we can that can help respect the privacy, keep the security, etc. Maybe that's just a wishful thing because that can be done, but I think there is clearly a gap for our community.
Yes, I totally agree with you. So deploying local hosted data collection in Nigeria, actually I did it, but truly enough, it was an organization that had the resource to have dedicated people to analyze and to produce this. Now, this being said, once we did it, what would have been great is to share it, but I'm not the manager of the organization. But yes, I think that there are lots of initiative and there are solutions to cope with this. Mainly, now we are reaching a point while it's starting to be interesting, but the sector is like really lacking of, let's say, self-organization or to share, like having a central platform. That's one thing I like about CartONG is that it's an NGO that tries to act and to play this role. Much more could be done on the technical side, but of course it's always the same thing. It lacks of technical resources in the sector to handle this. So I would say that it's feasible, but instead of everybody playing in his own corner or just like on his side, we should be able to share more the resources. Again, that could be driven by the donors, but actually that's not the field of interest, they don't care. So that's why it should come from the sector itself, and it's not easy because, again, even in the management of the organization, it's not a priority, and that's a pity. But yes, totally agree with you. It should be done, it's not done, but what I want to say is that it's feasible because the solutions are existing, actually. Belkis, I don't know if you have
No, you've covered it very, very eloquently.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
I have a question about machine learning. We talked about machine learning earlier, and we didn't talk again about it. And I'm thinking about what GeOnG just said. We don't have we're facing issues, and the issues that he said, well, we faced it together, so I know what he's talking about. And we don't have the resources to do like simple things like collect data with just collect data, case management, and have our own server. How can we do machine learning? And I'm wondering what did you do? What are you doing?
Yes, it's true. I completely forgot to talk about this. So the machine learning on the bot was a way for the bot to learn to speak the dialects and local language. So for once we were quite, with the chatbot project we were quite ahead of the technology, even in towards private sector. So for once we were like, hey, great. And of course it was like answering a real need. But for the machine learning, so the way it works is it just helps the as 60% of the population we were facing was literate, but that left 40% people having difficulties in read and write, and so they are usually using the voice note of features of WhatsApp, so they are just sending voice notes, receiving the voice note, and then talking. With a bot that is like acting like a voicemail, like type 1, press 1, press 2, press 3, that's a bit difficult because they cannot even read it or answer. We were trying to use emojis, so like having people reading the text and then they say, send us a sun if you want to see this topic or whatever. But it's quite framed and not easy to make it evolve. So it's a fixed set of interaction that you can do. With the machine learning, actually you are training the bot to understand what someone says when he's. It can be done with text or voice. Here it was more relevant for the voice, but actually it opens the way to qualitative data instead of quantitative data, because it's a free open field where someone, instead of press 1 to have the phone number of the Red Cross, well, you will just ask openly the question, and everybody in this room, if we were to do the exercise, you will phrase it a different way. Because that's how the language is done. In your own language, but even in the same language, you will say it, someone will say, I want, I do need, or whatever, and these type of ways of phrasing it, well, it's just like the bot will list them, and then he needs to understand what's the intention behind, and will just statistically, when you receive a message, you will start statistics and say, all right, usually when I receive a message into which there is Red Cross, people want the phone number, whatever there are the words around, usually they want the phone number. That's when you are on the forum or online, and at the end you have a question, was this answer helpful? Yes, no. Actually, that's machine learning. You're just telling the Google or whatever algorithm that gave you this answer while you are typing on Google. What's the how can I fix this, or how can I do this? Well, at some point there is an answer that is provided to you, and it's a machine answering you. So actually, they don't really know 100% that for sure that's what you were expecting. So machine learning is just statistics on a huge bunch of answers and interaction to fine-tune and improve the quality of interaction, but it's really great because it opens the way for open questions, so, and for dialects, because then you can, and that's also what I like with this, is that then it can be designed with the communities, because you will actually ask samples of, you can go to the community saying, in your own language or in your village, or how would you ask for this or this, and they will all give examples, and then you can make your system learning any local dialect. And what also is great is that then you can share these dictionaries among other within the sector. I would really strongly not advise to share it openly with private sector, because you never know what you can do with this. But dictionaries, I mean, if all the actors were just like, it's like mapping. If everybody can take a part of the world, and then we can map it, and then we can share this information in open source that it can serve everybody. With machine learning, that's the same. I don't know if this answers your question. I don't want to make it too long.
Actually, I think we are doing a lot of sensibilization, awareness, sensibilization, and that would be really, really useful for us to do things like that. Would be like, I don't know, I can imagine so many ways we could use this and if we could share this with for us, it would, because we are doing a lot of messaging, sending message. Sometimes they can answer yes, no, and we can have a basic that we do, but that's really another level, and I think first.
Well, I'm no more working on that project, but actually Nicolas, that is just there, is working on the project. So if you want to check with him what is shareable, just ask him. But yes, that actually at the beginning, at least, has been designed for that to share the tool and to make it used by most of the people.
Other questions?
Maybe just to react to this, if it's possible. Yeah. I think machine learning is great for scale, I would say, like the bots, you can reach millions of people with near human workforce, so that allows you to obviously reach a lot of people, which is great, and to save resources. But I think the one thing I would like to mention is the bias that you're training your algorithm. So that's great, but then you should be aware of the fact that the data used to train your AI influence the output of the AI. So the main risk there is, that you train your AI with a non-exhaustive enough data set. So example, like if you train, give me a picture of a doctor, it will give you a white male, right? Asians, black people, also doctors, right? So you want to make sure that you have a comprehensive data set to train your AI. That would be super important before you consider that. I mean, that would be one of the risks that you will get from it.
Yes, and that's why the bot is equipped with a front end to monitor the exchanges and the feedbacks that are provided, and to correct or to remove, to make sure that the quality is there. Yes, definitely.
I just wanted to come back to, the different contexts that were presented were very different in terms of power asymmetries. Like I would say in the Lebanon context, Fix, you had users who were actually asking to use the technology, while Belkis, a lot of the examples you were giving were very, the technology wasn't a choice, it was something that they had to accept in a way, if we're talking about the populations concerned. And I just wanted to ask you how you see how during the assessment that you would have at the beginning, etc., how do you take into account this sort of power asymmetry, knowing that the level of data awareness and digital awareness can be very different from one context to another, and therefore people might not even understand some of the questions you're asking.
I'm happy to address that, though again, very, very clearly saying I've never been on the sort of the humanitarian and provider side of this, so it's really just what I've observed and what has come through the interviews that I've done with data subjects. It's an immense problem. I think it's not just an issue of data literacy, and I'm based in Kiev. I'm calling in from Kiev today, and it is remarkable to see that because of the data literacy here, you've had many organizations trying to roll out projects since February 24th, where local communities have absolutely refused, and they've said, we're absolutely not giving our data for this. And that's because they have an understanding of what's being asked of them, and they really understand the potential risks. So I think that's, that speaks to your point that, in different contexts, you have different levels of data literacy and understanding or appreciation by local communities of what it is that they're being asked to agree to. But obviously your question goes to the bigger point, which is, informed consent and can people really be consenting with the power dynamics at play that you've spoken of, with potentially a lack of understanding of what's being asked of them and the full scope of the consequences potentially of sharing that data. It's really an immense problem. I think I've come to the opinion that, when we talk about informed consent in these contexts, it's sort of a charade and it's a bit ridiculous. What we could be talking about is robust information provision, right? And trying to provide people with as much information as possible in a language that they understand, in a form they understand, and then, hoping that that's enough to mean that, when they agree to give you their fingerprint, that they understand. But the idea that that is equivalent to informed consent is just inaccurate. And I do think it would be good within the industry to see a bit more honesty around that and around these discussions. And still many organizations are saying, oh, it's okay that we proceeded with this because we had informed consent. When again, that really it's hard to think in that framework when you're talking about people as vulnerable as they are.
And to complete this, so in terms of informed consent, I think that, and it's not only me, but just shared thoughts from ICSC, is that actually seeing the situation is quite, you cannot use informed consent as a legal way of collecting data. I don't mean that we don't need to proceed to the momentum at the beginning, explaining about and actually we should do more. But just the checkbox, actually, legally speaking, it has quite no value because I don't know much context where actually do. It's like if you want food, just sign here. Yes, of course they will sign here. They will sign everything. So whatever, and so it's not even that they cannot understand. It's just like what you are trying. The bargain is not fair. So actually, we should not consider this at least as a legal way to do it. Now, of course, explaining, and when I say trying to explain, I don't want to be patronizing, but following also studies that Fred was part of, in some contexts, even the notion of privacy, because they are living in communities, etc., it's completely different. I mean, the notion as we understand it. So it's complete complete other culture or context, and that leads me to the second point, where when I'm starting projects as the WhatsApp or other project, one key aspect I really focus on it, and also on the budgetization, etc., is to have studies with the communities or with the future user to validate that there is a need, that the context we are thinking of about the project is compatible with the way it will be received, but also having more anthropologists or community workers, or at least people that knows how it works in the communities, what's the culture, how and it takes part of the do not harm, actually, because you cannot just come and arrive, drop a technology and disrupt the way the communities are organized. You may want to proceed to a change because you think that maybe empowerment of some neglected part of the community can be a good thing, but still you cannot just like jump into it and throw it. So I always try, and that's also part of the experience I had with the biometrics, etc., is to design with the communities. It's really important. I mean, you cannot just arrive and and messing around.
Other questions? I may have one, mainly for Belkis. I'd like to come back on the impact assessments, and so we've spoken about the do no harm principle, which of course is one of the main ones. Is there any, and I mean there's no, I'm just curious, is there a reflection already, or are there tools, at least conceptual tools, to prioritize principles and objectives that might be conflicting or appear conflicting? For example, I'm thinking biometrics. I'm playing the devil's advocate here because I fully agree with you, but one might say, owing to the biometrics, we will avoid, for example, some organized crimes to use the vulnerable people for a massive organized fraud, etc. So it's in their own interest, and do no harm commands us to use the biometrics. So yeah, is there, I mean, and they might be conscious of the risks, by the way, but they might decide otherwise. So, I mean, do we have some tools, at least conceptual tools, to deal with such apparent contradictions?
Listen, I think it's an interesting one, and you know, I wish, and I haven't gotten the sense that conversations like that, and you know, a discussion as thoughtful as the one you just provided, are actually happening. I think that that's exactly what should happen in the context of a proposal for a project which foresees, you know, data collection, where, as you said, the choice to use biometrics is to try and mitigate some other risk. And then the question is, okay, can we mitigate that risk in a different way? Do we have proof that this will actually mitigate the risk? Because I would say, you know, I'm a bit skeptical when I hear claims put forward largely by donors that don't really come with sort of evidence to back them up. I mean, you know, these claims on the fraud side, particularly, that come from donors around, you know, biometrics being the one, the best, the only way to prevent fraud. You know, I've never seen any sort of peer-reviewed scientific data from donors to substantiate that. It might exist, it might be true, but I've never seen that presented. And so I would actually query that. You know, is the fraud happening at that level or higher up in the pecking order? You know, in many cases, the fraud is happening in terms of who actually gets on the beneficiary list. So it's not about the person who picks up the bag of rice, but it's the fact that you were on the list to get the bag of rice to begin with. And obviously, in that case, biometrics doesn't do anything to respond to that. So I think, you know, one would want to query that. But if your hypothetical were factually correct, and use of biometrics, as I said, was there to mitigate this other real risk, you know, I think that it's definitely something worth engaging in. And then again, if the only choice for you to mitigate that risk is use of biometrics, then I think the discussion would become, okay, then what steps can we take to ensure that there's no risk that by collecting these biometrics, you don't open people up to other harms. And I think, you know, again, our position isn't that biometrics should never be collected, but it's that if you're going to collect them, you really have to have gone through the thought process of, you know, identifying all the risks and mitigating them. The extent to which organizations have the tools to be doing that arithmetic, like I said, I don't know, but most organizations that I speak to are not even engaging in discussions around use of these technologies at that level. They're just jumping in and deciding we're going to use biometrics sort of regardless. And often they're making that decision before, you know, the project is even fully conceptualized. Whereas you would imagine that you'd want to first think about what's the aim of the project, what is the goal, and then there's a question: do we need biometrics in order to achieve that? And if yes, how do we mitigate the risks that can be linked to that?
Thank you. Another question from Maeve.
It's just that your point leads me to another element is that we very rarely actually evaluate information management projects, and like, for example, the implementation of biometrics, or even an IM system like the one that Fix was presenting. We just, the cost of setting up these types of technologies, it's as if technology was, not evaluatable material. It's something that we consider as it's necessarily a great innovation, and we should test it out, etc., as a sector. But I really feel that we need to start engaging with that topic and evaluating these projects, especially the big UN ones, etc., and trying to encourage those conversations starting. We've just come out with a mini tool, CartONG, and there's a workshop for those online on this, on evaluating the IM dimensions of wider programs. But it's something where we're just starting the reflection on the methodological side, but it's very rare to actually find use cases on the relevance of using IM, showing that IM is, as you guys were saying earlier, it's not just a means and ends, etc. And for me, it's really part of those discussions that we need to encourage donors to think about and put them in front of their responsibilities in these types of topics.
Yes, true. It's much needed, definitely, and it's not like spontaneously coming in the discussions. The bot has been evaluated because it was part of a budgeted, granted project. But true enough, we've been, beside this fancy, nice and useful project, we were also working on improving the Excel sheets, and of course this part was completely shadowed, because no one wants to take the time to evaluate that the new Excel sheet that you might have improved will save 3 days of work to people, because they will say, okay, great, yeah, it saves, thank you, and then 1 month later, this new Excel sheet has becoming the default setup, and no one is anymore keeping track and record on how it was before, and then with the turnover it might be lost, etc. So indeed, having or building a kind of a framework for evaluating IM tools and improvements in terms of the added value, first, to me it's much needed, because technology, sometimes it's a good idea, sometimes it's just a waste of money and time, and we should be fair enough to admit it, and but usually the ones who are paying don't want that the report says that they wasted their money. So of course that's the usual setup, but at least internally this should be considered as lessons learned. So yes, if CartONG is developing a framework of evaluation, that would be amazing. I need to go, so if ever you had a question, it's now. Right?
Very quick question about the chatbot. You talked about the digital gap, and did you think about solutions to mitigate it? Or was something implemented, or was it just a conclusion that there was a digital gap that was just erased?
So that was not a conclusion, that was at the beginning of the project. We knew that it will not address the 100%. It has not been addressed, honestly, because that was not part of the project. For this one, we were working on testing a tool and the impact on the users, the one that would use it, as an added service, but on an existing for years context that was already existing. So the angle to take it was, all right, we are delivering services to everybody so far, we will try to improve the service delivery, at least on information level, to the ones who have access to this technology, knowing, and that's really important to say that, knowing and admitting that it's not perfect, but let's first start to evaluate if it already provides an impact, so with evaluation on the users, and then with the machine learning trying to cover a broader population, like from 60 to these 90%. And then the purpose is to advocate, saying, all right, so now we've been covering 90% of the population. It would be great to have a project to go for this 10%. While the word, like what was provided to the field teams will say, all right, so we are deploying this project, but please, meanwhile, don't forget the others. So it's not like replacing; it's just an added service. But yes, it's needed, and it was not done because that was not part of that project. But it's needed and should be addressed.
Well, unless there's an urgent question, I think it's maybe time to wrap up. So no remaining question. Okay, so thank you all. Thank you, Balkis. Thank you, Fitz. I'm very happy actually to have facilitated this because it was really interesting. I learned a lot of things. And I'm very happy to hear from our speakers and from the audience that many people are wondering and reflecting about those questions, because I think it's very important. So it's kind of reassuring to, I'm really into those questions. So it's really reassuring for me to see that many people are thinking about it. So thank you all.